Hello and welcome to Clinic Conversation. Today we're talking about introducing laser and IPL into your clinic. Hey, Kate.
Hey, Alyssa, how you doing?
I'm good. How's life for you?
Good. But I have to say, look, this is really fascinating, this stuff, because I haven't really worked a lot in this industry. And so it's really interesting to me. How would I go about introducing this stuff? And I guess the first question I have is like, there's laser and there's IPL. So is there a difference? Are they the same? Like, are they just interchangeable terms?
Look, they're often used interchangeably, but they're not. And a lot of people think that an IPL is a laser, but they're not. They're both energy-based devices or light-based devices. So they have lots of similarities. And there's more things in common with laser and IPL than there is differences. So let's start with IPL. IPL stands for intense pulsed light. Now, IPL essentially, when the light comes through from that machinery, it comes through as a white light, but it's not the white light, like almost like a torch light. It's not the white light that we want, because when we're using light therapies for treating skin and hair, or tattoos indeed, we want to be able to filter out the exact wavelength that we need to interact with our target. So what we do with an IPL is we filter the colors out of that white light, and we use a filter that's either built already into the handpiece or is something like, it's a little bit like a microscope slide that you slide into the handpiece. So what you end up with is a filter with which that white light goes through, but then what comes out is, sometimes you see it as yellow, sometimes you see it as red, sometimes you see it as a greeny color. But depending on what we're treating with an intense pulse light is what filter we're going to use. So for example, if we're going to use it for hair reduction, we're going to use something that essentially looks red. So in a wavelength about 620 nanometers, for example. If we're treating pigmentation, we'll use something that filters out the yellow. IPL are as tricky to use and equally can be as dangerous as using a laser. A lot of people think that having an IPL is a safer way to do clinical treatments and that you don't need particularly too much knowledge to use one. And this isn't true. IPL in the wrong hands can cause significant harm, i.e. blisters, burns, scarring, as an IPL. The good thing about an intense pulse light is that it's got quite a significantly cheaper price point to get entry into market. So a good IPL is going to cost somewhere between probably 50,000 and maybe 80,000. So it's a really great way for people to start in their clinics if they're not entirely sure about whether they want to invest in a laser. Because we know with lasers, a good laser is going to start probably at about $50,000 and go up. So an IPL is quite versatile and it's a really great starter point for people in their businesses. The common things you can do with an IPL are hair reduction. You can collapse vessels, and they're very good for diffuse redness, so that kind of flushing type redness or those superficial capillaries. Great for reducing the activities of P. acnes bacteria, so reducing down acne breakouts. It's also excellent for improving pigmentation. So whether it's a spot treatment or a full face treatment, IPLs are really great for that as well. What IPL isn't good for, though, is you can't remove tattoos with it. You wouldn't use it for people with melasma, because melasma is a hormonal type pigment and it has a vascular component or a blood component to it. So the IPL can be too hot and can make the melasma worse. The other thing it can't be used for is laser skin resurfacing. So it can't actually retexturize the skin. But from a beginner's perspective, or if you're just starting to dip your toes into this whole field, an IPL can be a really great place to start. Now, IPLs are only regulated in Tasmania. So for all of the other states and territories, you can implement an IPL very quickly and very easily. There's IPLs where you just use a stamping motion for doing the treatments for, say, hair removal or face rejuvenation. Then there's other hair removal IPLs that we hear commonly called super hair removals, or SHR, which makes hair removal really quick. So an IPL can be a really great place to start. It's also not confined by having to have a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy with the different radiation health departments. So, as I said, in Tasmania, that's the only place that you're required to follow regulations around IPL. But again, with an IPL, you are under the standards for Australia and New Zealand, you're still required to have a laser safety certificate. So, no matter what light based device you're using, whether it's an LED, a laser, an IPL, you need to have done some laser safety training.
They're quite intense pieces of equipment. I mean, they're quite technical. They're not something that I can imagine anyone being able to just go in and intuitively pick it up and let's start.
No, absolutely not. So there's a couple of key things to look for with an IPL. So one of the mistakes I think people make is buying things secondhand or buying them off a not so reputable supplier. There's a few reasons not to do this. Look, at its most basic, you might have a machine that isn't actually performing how you think it might. So, as you say, Kate, they're really technical. So, the wavelengths are very specific, and we can measure those wavelengths right down in that wavelight bandwidth into nanometers. So, you want to make sure that your wavelength is what is actually being emitted. So that if your target, if you've got a target, it's going to match your target. You're going to get the result in a safe way that you want. Um, they're highly technical because they're delivering light in microseconds. So we can't even fathom that in our brains or with our blinking or our heartbeats or anything. It's just happening incredibly fast. So the technical and engineering expertise that it takes to have one of these machines working really well is quite high. When you have an IPL, you also want to not only have your um, operations manual, but you want your clinical protocols and you also want some clinical training attached to that. So those are the three key things that you need in the practical space. The other thing that I see happen all the time is some of the cheaper IPL machines, the part of crystal that sits on the skin is often a quartz crystal rather than a sapphire tip. A sapphire crystal is better because the sapphire actually pulls the heat away from the skin. It has a cooling effect as you use it. So some of the cheaper IPL machines, the crystal that they're using isn't high quality and your patient can be prone to burns, not just from the heat building up, but also the integrity of the crystal. If the crystal gets scratched or gets chipped, it can actually cause a burn to the patient. So there's lots of things to consider around that technology.
And I know you've told me before that if you buy from a reputable, it's okay to look at secondhand equipment, but buying it from a reputable manufacturer, reputable business, because they often provide support, don't they? And things like training manuals or how to use the manuals. I'm a big manual person. My husband is a not reading a manual person, but I always read the manuals of anything that we get, and it just helps me get the most out of the piece of equipment, whatever it is. So, but with this, I mean, I'd certainly, if I'm going to be taking someone else's health skin into my hands, then I'd be wanting to make sure that I knew what I was doing.
Indeed. And as much as, we might sound a little bit hashtag nerdy talking about manual, it's really important to the translation of that manual because on and off, there's not much of a difference between on and off. But if you've got somebody translating from another language, it can be the difference between something that's working really beautifully or an absolute disaster.
Mm. So look, there's kind of, the way I look at it is there's kind of two main streams of clinics, IPL laser clinics out there, in that often there's people who've come from a more beauty industry. Maybe they're doing eyebrows or waxing or facials and that kind of thing. And maybe they don't have a background, a more medical background. And then there are people who've got a more medical background creating these clinics or introducing this equipment into their clinic. So are there two different pathways with this? Are there two different sets of knowledge that I need?
Look, that's a really good point. So before we move into laser, we might talk a little bit about therapeutic claims and insurance. So when we are looking after our patients and our clients, there's two different types of claims that we can make. One is a therapeutic claim and one is not. So a therapeutic claim is when we say something like improves scarring or reduces acne. So we can make those therapeutic claims if we're a registered health professional and we're using a device that has been approved by the TGA for that purpose. So how they get approval is they have to submit their research papers. They're called clinical papers or white papers. The companies have to submit those to the TGA. They also have to submit a whole stack of other supportive paperwork. So things like patient consent forms, before and after photos, patient information for pre-care and post-care. So when you're using a TGA device to make a therapeutic claim, you've got a very rigorous platform to be working from. My advice to anybody that is a registered health professional with AHPRA or any other professional board would be to make sure that you're only using TGA listed equipment, because otherwise you can't claim that it's doing what you're saying it's doing. So I think that's a really important thing to remember. So with an IPL, for example, you're not going to be making any therapeutic claims with an IPL. So an IPL can lighten skin, improve tone, remove hair. Removing hair isn't a therapeutic claim, it's cosmetic. So we have a split here between what we consider cosmetic or appearance medicine and what is actually in the medical realm. So the medical realm would be, as I say, reducing acne, improving scarring. And then in the case of something like photodynamic therapy, which is using photobiostimulation modalities, it would be targeting abnormal cells and skin cancers. So they're quite different realms that we're working in when we're working with laser and IPL. However, the standards are the same regardless. So if you're a barber who's setting up their own hair removal business as an adjunct to their chain of barber shops, for example, you will actually be held to the same account when you're removing hair as if a registered medical professional such as a dermatologist was performing that same treatment. So just because we're not actually working, side by side, we're actually held to the same standards.
That's interesting. So that is often, that's obviously quite a big leap, even a big mental leap, if you're going to do this professionally and go, okay, now I understand that I'm going to be held to those same sort of standards and accountable. So I might not be under AHPRA. I may not be an AHPRA professional, which if anyone is listening and hasn't heard of AHPRA, that's the Australian Health Practitioners Regulation Agency. And most people know if they come under AHPRA because they are registered health practitioners. Whereas people who have, say, like you suggest, a barber's salon or a beauty salon, then they may not be under AHPRA. So
that's right. But that still doesn't protect you either if you make a mistake or you do something negligent, because what we know is that under the Australian regulations, you'll be held to the same account as your peers. So if you're performing a treatment, you will be held to the same account if you go to court for it. So it's highly protective to have done your laser safety course, to have your operator's manual and your clinical protocols, to get your clinical training. People I find do really well with secondhand machinery are people who've already used it before and they're so busy, they want another one of what they've got. So that's when secondhand really comes into its own. But if you're brand new, you need brand new.
Yep. Yeah. Well, there's really not too many pieces of equipment in any business that I can think of that is a substantial investment that we would go, oh, look, there's a bargain. That must be, it looks too good to be true. So it must be fantastic.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like buying a Louis Vuitton bag. You can buy a Louis Vuitton bag and none of the branding on it will be covered with stitches, or you can buy a Louis Vuitton bag, which is very obvious that it's not one because the stitching covers their logo at every point in the making of the bag. So it's a little bit like the Louis Vuitton handbag.
Yeah.
Fake, and you're probably not going to have much of an effect, or you can buy the real thing.
And the quality is there as well in the look and feel and that sort of thing. So yeah, it is a big minefield. Those obviously one of the first things to do is to go and make the smaller investment of like, let's go and do our laser safety training.
Absolutely.
And let's get sort of certified.
It's a complete no-brainer. So if you do your laser safety training and then you do one of our other courses that's specific to the types of conditions you like to treat, if you do that before you buy a laser or an IPL, you're going to save yourself thousands of dollars in mistakes. I can guarantee it. Just to go back to the difference between IPL and laser, So lasers are similar, except they don't filter out the light. So lasers actually have the medium inside the machines that they can only emit the wavelength for what they've got actually in their machine. And you can have multiple wavelengths in a machine. In fact, some machines will not only have laser, but they'll have IPL, they'll have skin tightening, they'll have fat cavitation, they'll have a handpiece for tattoo removal, they'll have a handpiece for super hair removal. So the complexity of trying to choose machinery is really very, very difficult. But where lasers are different is lasers are that they need to be regulated and controlled in Tasmania, Western Australia, and Queensland. So there's complexity around that. There's licensing around who can use them as well. Lasers are much more expensive, but they're also much more specific than IPL. So they've got more things that you can do with a laser, for example. So with lasers, you can do things like you can do something called low-level laser, which is photobiomodulation. So things like using LED lights for wound healing or for calming of skin that's inflamed, or reducing acne, improving wrinkles and lines. So you can have very low-level laser. You can use lasers for very specific vascular conditions. So lasers are much better for working with blood vessels. So things like vascular birthmarks, cherry angiomas, facial vessels, vascular lasers are very specific to that and just quite beautiful tools to use in that space. They can be used for age spots. They can be used for melasma. So compared to IPL, you can most definitely use lasers for melasma or pregnancy hormone as well. These are nanosecond and picosecond lasers. So rather than directly using heat to destroy the pigment, they're actually vibrating those brown particles into even smaller pieces. So it's a really great way to clear pigmentation. Lasers you can use on a lot more different skins as well. You wouldn't use an IPL on Fitzpatrick skin types 5 or 6. But for those darkest skin types, we have lasers like Nd:YAG lasers and alexandrite lasers, which are really great for darker skin. Other things that we can use lasers for are tattoo removal, and we can also use it for skin rejuvenation and skin resurfacing. So how I describe the difference between what's rejuvenation and what is resurfacing. Rejuvenation is non-invasive, but what it does is it stimulates and heats up the skin to build new collagen. So when I describe rejuvenation, I describe it as if you were fertilizing the lawn. So you're just putting a little sprinkle across the top, getting better lawn. Resurfacing, on the other hand, is like coring your lawn. So it's taking small little pieces out of your skin and you're growing new skin through. So you're coring your lawn and you're actually resurfacing the skin a percentage at a time. So quite different. The other thing about lasers is that there are some specific safety that you have to put in as well. So sometimes you will have to, actually it's for IPL as well. So the safety things that you need to put in place for all energy-based devices is things like laser safety glasses, covering your windows, putting a sign on the door that tells you what laser is being used, or that an IPL is being used. Staff training we've already talked about. So anybody that fires a laser or an intense pulse light under the regulations should have a laser safety certificate.
And I know that some of those things, like the warning sign for the door, one of your blog posts, I think, recently had, or maybe not recently, but it had the option for people to be able to go and download it and get that for free. So we'll make sure that we put those sorts of resources in the show notes for this episode, so that people can go, and all of the free resources that you've got on Bravura website, then people can access those to help them. So this is, it's actually quite complex. It's not as simple as just going out and picking a piece of equipment. So it sounds as though a good pathway would be let's go and do my laser safety certificate. And then from there, it's probably giving me enough information to start making some decisions about whether I want, what sort of applications I want to do. Do I want to do like a tattoo? Do I want to do hair removal? And what's my sort of hit list and priority list for me personally running my clinic? What sort of things do I want to do? And then go and do a certificate in that specific thing, like in tattoo removal or whatever. And then from there go, now I feel equipped to go out and start looking for piece of equipment. So start talking to manufacturers. Yep.
You've got to decide, if we have a car analogy, you've got to decide whether you're going to ride a motorbike or you're going to be able to reverse a double, is it a double D semi-trailer or double? I think double D is a bra size, but anyway, but you've got to decide what machine that you're going to invest in, because you need to start with the end in mind. So if you think you might like to dabble in hair reduction, for example, or you're, one of those people that you were talking about that's in a brow salon or something who wants to do a little bit of hair removal, by all means, use a laser or an IPL machine to do hair removal. But also start to think about whether there's anything else that your customers might start to ask from you that you might not have planned for before. Now, if you've got a machine that only does hair removal, you can only do hair removal. But if you grow your business and you say appoint a beauty therapist or a dermal therapist, if you've thought ahead with your machinery, you can actually add pieces onto it to make it much more versatile. So there's no reason why you couldn't start with a super hair removal handpiece on your platform, but then maybe employ a dermal therapist or a registered nurse to do tattoo removal and just add another piece onto your platform. So you need to really future-proof your what you buy with where you want to go with your business. So,
and that machine, so you were mentioning earlier that you could get a laser that can do IPL and do all these other things, like the setup, like the Swiss Army knife of lasers. Obviously, the price point for that I would expect to be different to a simpler machine that does less. But clearly, the adaptability and the flexibility of that is a big plus.
absolutely. That's a great way of describing it, the Swiss Army knife. If you can just imagine that the platform is just this gigantic, really heavy box, but you can, add all of these different, the screwdriver, the knife, the spoon, you can add it all on. So it's not unusual in some of the really high functioning clinics to see multiple platforms like this in each.
Yeah. I kind of also can align it to deliveries for some reason. It's similar to like, well, what sort of deliveries do I want to do? Do I want to have a moped where I can fit maybe some pizza on the delivery? Like on that scale, do I need a van? Do I need a semi-trailer truck? Do I need a van until I get big enough to need a truck? So it's kind of like working out, well, what is it that I'm after and what does my business look like in the foreseeable future?
That's exactly right. That's exactly
What
right.
the decisions to make.
But lots of decisions, you've got to understand what your customers are asking for, or if you don't have any customers, how you go to market to them. You've also got to decide what you're interested in. And, we had a clinical trainer speak to us recently who said, if you're going to do laser skin resurfacing, you need to be prepared to pick your phone up at midnight on a Saturday night because you've got a patient who's really stressed out about the swelling and redness. So you've got to also think what sort of interactions you want with your patients, how much hand holding you need to do with them. So, hair removal, underarm, straightforward, in, out, you're probably, that patient's not going to be any trouble at all and they'll be back in 4 weeks for another treatment. But when you're moving into something complex like skin resurfacing, where, there can be pinpoint bleeding, there can be, a little bit of bruising, there's definitely redness and swelling, itching, maybe some hives, you really need to be prepared to hold the hand for that patient through that whole journey. And that might not suit your business.
And that being customer-centric business, that's very important to me. And I really think it can be the differentiating factor these days between an also-ran business and a really successful business, because most of us we've kind of come full circle. We've gone from bespoke businesses hundreds of years ago where we weren't able to travel very much, so we used all the local bespoke business owners. Then the whole department store thing revolutionized everything. And now we're coming back to much smaller businesses that we want to interact with because they do usually give us better customer service.
Yeah.
So, this customer service experience, this whole customer service experience can make or break your business. And so if you're not prepared to do that answering the phone late at night because someone's having a reaction or is concerned about their response, that can be a huge impact.
And at the absolute heart of this is trust. You've literally got their face in your hands. So part of that trust is having the education and the language to be able to clearly articulate to your patients and your clientele what it is you're doing, why it suits them, how much it's going to cost, what their downtime might be, what their follow-up is. So you need to be able to really have this rolling off your tongue so that you exude all of that beautiful confidence and keep that patient safe and having a lovely experience. I think one of the most amazing things that we do in this industry is we make everything look so easy. And I think one of the criticisms of the cosmetic medicine, one of the criticisms of the cosmetic medicine industry is that people think that some of these quite complex procedures are as straightforward as having an eyebrow wax. But the technical and scientific thinking that goes into even just choosing the parameters that you need to do laser hair removal on a leg, for example, is really complicated. You've got to have a very strong understanding of the science of light. You've got to understand how your different systems work, how they're similar, how they're different, why they do what they do. You need to understand the regulatory framework and the legislation and standards that are influential to your practice. You've got to have a deep understanding of skin. So one of the courses that we have is on skin anatomy and physiology for cosmetic medicine. So you really need to understand the skin and then understanding with that skin, what are you going to choose? What tool are you going to choose to treat that particular condition? And when you do have that tool, what are the different components that you need to take into consideration to get the best result? So I describe this a little bit like how to cook a cake. So when we're using laser and IPL, we've actually got all these ingredients that we put together in different amounts, half a cup of this, a pinch of that, so that we're putting together the perfect treatment for the skin that's in front of you. So things that we need to learn about and consider are things like wavelength, how long the pulse is on for, how long the pulse is off for, how fast we do it, how long we need to leave skin to cool in between those times we do treatment. So the critical thinking for this is really complex. Technicians don't just push a button and go one size fits all. There's a lot of technical thinking goes on behind these.
So there's obviously also a number of technical terms that you've used here. And so it could be easy to sort of think, oh, I need some sort of qualification before going down this pathway. But that's not really true, is it? I mean, I know you get asked this quite often is, do I need to have a beauty certificate? Do I need to be a nurse? Do I need some sort of, sort of training before going down this path? But we can go down this pathway so long as we educate ourselves before we start.
Let me start quite high level with an Australian example. So there are a few restrictions, but there's actually not as many as we like to have to place on ourselves. And I also must say there's a lot of disingenuous colleges out there that will try to sign you up for courses that you don't actually need. So for example, if you want to become a laser technician, you don't need to know how to wax eyebrows or do eyelash extensions. So if we start at a high level first, so Western Australia is a really good example. If you want to do tattoo removal in Western Australia, you need to either be a registered nurse or a beauty therapist that has diploma level training. So that's quite specific to that state. If we move to Queensland, in Queensland, you need to have a trainee license. You need to be mentored and have your competence signed off by a full Queensland licensee before you can go ahead and independently treat patients. So some of the legislation is in those different states and territories are quite specific and will limit you. But
is that just for laser, not for IPL?
Yeah, just for laser, except Tasmania, you have to have a laser safety certificate and some robust clinical training as well for IPL as well. And so you should. This should be across the board, but it's not. So for the other states and territories, that we have no regulations in those other states and territories. But again, if we take it to the highest level again, our Australia and New Zealand standards tell us that everybody who uses a laser or an IPL must have, as a minimum, a laser safety certificate. So that and some sort of education in skin anatomy and physiology is your absolute backbone place to start. And then you can start adding on around that. So we've allowed for that at Bravura Education. We've allowed you to start with those core courses that you need. So skin anatomy and physiology and the beginner's course, which is the laser safety certificate. If you've got no prior experience or no beauty diploma, or you're not a registered health professional, those two are a perfect place to start. Then you can build around that. So if you wanted to do hair reduction, you can do the hair reduction component. If you want to do hair reduction and skin therapies, for example, you do our advanced course. If you just wanted to do skin rejuvenation and resurfacing, you just do that module. So you're able to build around it. One of the other things that is really important before you buy your machinery or introduce these technologies into your clinic is have a really frank conversation with your insurer before you start. So your insurer will be able to tell you whether they will insure you for that particular machine. It might be an illegal import and they won't insure you for it.
Oh,
Yes. So there is a lot of rubbish comes in illegally. So things that haven't been approved by the TGA or the safety profile of them isn't necessarily known to us. There is a whole lot of illegal machines out there. I couldn't even begin to have a hazard a guess at how many are there. So again, whenever you hear me talk about this, you're going to hear me talking about having a really solid supplier and clinical training for this, because you can lose tens of thousands of dollars if you get a dodgy machine. And if you harm that patient and you're using a machine that's an illegal import, your insurance won't cover you. So you need to be very, very careful.
That's a minefield, isn't it? But the good thing is that it's not like I have to undertake a 3-year degree. It's like I can do a laser safety certificate and I can digest that. And then I can do a little bit more of it. You know what? I think what I'm going to do is just implement, dip my toe in the water. I can get an IPL. It's a lower investment. I can take a bite-sized chunk, and then I can always build on that later. Or I can go, you know what? I have decided I really want to do tattoo removal or whatever. I've crossed my regulations. I've done my training. I have a fair idea of which manufacturers to talk to, and I can start having those discussions and start working that stuff out. So I can kind of do a little bit, or I can do a lot, which is good.
And we're all different. We've all got different interests. We've all got different risk appetites. We've got completely different directions that we want to take our businesses in. So a lot of that thinking needs to be done way before you ever knock on the door for someone to sell you a laser. And definitely before you start to get bogged down in looking online for machines. So on our homepage, we've got a handful of companies that we recommend. We don't get any sort of an incentive from them or any kickbacks for recommending them, but we do have them there for a number of reasons. First reason is their machinery and their results are backed by scientific evidence. They do what they say they're going to do. They give you all of the things that you need to get up and going. So your patient consent forms, your patient pre-care, post-care, your documentation for documenting your treatments, they'll have there as well. And that also provides some degree of clinical training. So clinical training is an interesting one. We started Bravura Education 7 years ago, and we concentrated on just doing online courses. Then we dabbled a bit in doing workshops for practical, because people thought that they wanted practical. It is so interesting how many people, after they've spent time with us doing their online course, thought that they needed us to do practical, but they don't, because they make great decisions about what they purchase. And they end up finding that practical experience comes from the supplier. So a good supplier will not only build in that initial orientation to your machine and your practical experience, but they're going to be there for you for ongoing support as well.
That's really reassuring, isn't it? So they also give you some of that documentation that you're going to need.
They do. And all of that documentation they've put through their legal teams as well.
Wow.
They do, but they do recommend you take it to your own lawyer, but they have put all of that through their own legal teams.
Mm.
They're incredibly good documents. And I don't know about you, but I hate staring at a blank page trying to invent things. So wherever I find that we can get at least the backbone or a framework for our thinking done for us, it enables us to actually spend our energy doing other things.
Mm.
Our beginners course, for example, we've got some templates built into that as well for policy and procedure. So not only do we have the editable template for laser, for the door sign, but the door sign for IPL, but we also have templates there for standard operating policy and procedures on things like controlled access, laser safety eyewear, test firing lasers, things like that. So a lot of it is done for you. So, if you make a wise decision about your education and make a wise decision about the choice of laser, a lot of that operational work you won't have to actually source. It will be done for you.
And this is something that we know if we've made it to a reasonable age of being adults in this life, most of us have some experience of going, you know what, I bought the cheap option and it wasn't as much of value as if I paid a little bit more. Like most of us can now understand that pretty much usually you get what you pay for in this life. And sometimes the benefit of paying a bit more, you get a whole bunch of value. And we're also time poor these days, that getting some of that documentation that's gone through lawyers, or, a good starting point, even if you have to, put them through your own lawyers, it's just such a massive time saver as well as a stress saver, because time and stress, they're two of our biggest, they're on all of us. So being able to save that is massive.
And look, I remember someone saying to me probably about 15 years ago, we should all be practicing our clinical work with a lawyer sitting on our shoulder. So coming from a really strong risk management background from the get-go, it's no good to plead ignorant, and it certainly won't stand up in court. And I don't know doesn't count. It's the same as if you've had a crash and you're drinking or under the influence of drugs. It's no excuse. So you really do need to have those systems in place before you get going to support you and to protect your patients and your.
Yeah. It's actually very similar to martial arts. My kids did martial arts for a long time. My eldest daughter was nearly a black belt, and they were always taught, we have to assume that there is a camera on us at some point, and you do not want to be the one. You need to be able to say, I was defending myself. I wasn't starting anything. So I was defending, not provoking.
Yep.
So it's kind of the same. Pretend you've got a camera watching you, pretend you've got a lawyer on your shoulder. That's a good concept. So we've kind of covered the education and some of the high level options with manufacturers and where to go to look for reputable manufacturers. Is there anything else that we need to think about if we're considering implementing IPL or laser into a clinic?
Look, one of the things that I would say you need to consider is consumables. What types of consumables are you going to need for your equipment? So some equipment doesn't need any consumables. Others, it can be quite expensive. So a laser resurfacing tip to go on the handpiece can be $600, for example. So you need to think about what consumables are involved in what you do, because that comes at a cost. Also, as a rule of thumb, I find that the lasers that need consumables, you get much better attention from the supplier because they're always interested. It's like the razor and the blade. They're always interested in making sure that you've got your blade. So you will have an ongoing relationship with that supplier. If you're buying a laser that doesn't have any consumables, it's highly likely that you'll never see the salesman again. So that is a really interesting thing. Also, your community. What does your community want? Is it a community where there's so many people from a background where they need hair reduction that nobody can get an appointment to get hair reduction? Is it a place where there's a younger acne type clientele? So really know your community, your local community, and what they need, because you don't want to be supplying things that they're not going to take up.
Exactly. You don't want to be offering tattoo removal if your clientele are more focused on anti-aging and resurfacing and that kind of stuff. So, and again, your comment about consumables, they're often, I mean, you have to pass the consumable cost on to the consumer. And so if we're going all high end, but we're in an area, maybe our demographic is fairly new mums and they're more interested in lower cost things and anti-acne, and we're offering things that are more aimed at people who are perhaps more affluent and more mature, then there's a misfit, isn't there? And we all know people won't travel across cities to go to different places. We need to look at what is our demographic, and we can find a lot of that information out online, which is great.
You will indeed. Look, another thing that a reputable supplier will do for you is they will help you with your costings, your recommended retail pricing for your area. They'll help you put that together. They'll also give you very clear direction on what your expected timing for a return on investment will be and how you can model your cash flow and your payments. So a lot of companies will do, they'll do lease to buy, they'll do lease, you can buy them outright, you can take out a business loan. There's a number of different ways that you can get those machines into your hot little hands. Good suppliers will also help you with marketing materials. So they'll give you beautiful glossy brochures that you can add your information to. They'll give you sometimes videos, images that you can use on your social media. Now, any of the organisations that have TGA approval, all of their befores and afters have been TGA approved as well. So you can use them without any fear. So there's so much that you will get from a reputable supplier that is way beyond just a machine on four wheels.
That's really good to know. They have a vested interest in wanting you to do well, wanting your clinic to do well so that you could continue to buy consumables or upgrade machines or get extra hand pieces or get extra equipment. So and they want
a third clinic, a chain of clinics.
Exactly.
Yep.
At the bare minimum to make sure that to do everything that they can to help ensure that you continue to make your lease repayments or pay off the equipment. So it's nice that they are actually supportive in that way and they provide so much that you can use to get you going, which is fantastic.
And I think just to kind of, put a bookend to all of this as well, Kate, it'd be great to talk to these guys today about the Bravura Beauties because none of us needs to be working in a silo or working in isolation. And a lot of us are sole providers or we've got a small team or we're business owners and we're really busy. So at Bravura, we have a beautiful, no pun intended, but beautiful initiative. It's actually called the Bravura Beauties, but it's a networking and mentoring group for business owners, people starting out, people who are well established. It's got an online platform to help with some education around things like social media, how to prevent burns, how to set up a laser room. And we also have a lot of live stuff happening with that Bravura Beauties group. So we have things like guest speakers around insurance, choosing the right machine, how to run a business. And we have live sessions as well where our group gets together and gets to talk with their peers about some of their pressing issues and share resources and share ideas. So having that ongoing linkage with your peers is so essential. And I feel like it's just a natural transition into a program like the Bravura Beauties.
What it is. And the great thing is there's people at all different stages. And I have to say, one of the best things that I ever did for my business is to hang out with people who are in the same industry as me and are either at a similar or more advanced space, because something happens it's sort of by osmosis, just hanging out with them, hearing the way that they speak and the way they approach things, it just changes my own mindset. And it also helps to normalize success. It really does, because we do, no matter what we think, most of us do have an element of a fear of success and a fear of failure. So being able to hang out with other people in that space makes such a big difference. It really does. And we deliberately made this online as well so that it's accessible to everyone. And we've had people in Orange and regional country towns say, oh, it's so nice to have this sort of thing that I don't have to travel to Sydney for.
That's right. That's right. And there's nothing new under the sun. So if you're having the issue, I can guarantee one of your peers in that network is having the same. So, we're seeing lovely sharing as well on our Facebook group of people helping one another. So it's so important because we just need that support. And we're all so overwhelmed with our decision making. We've fatigued about decisions. So if we can actually learn off our peers how they got to that point, how did they decide what they were
Yep.
going to package up and sell as a monthly treatment for a patient? You know,
Yep.
how did they do that? And what we've got with that Reviewer Beauties initiative is such a diverse group of people that none of them are in competition to one another either.
Mm.
So the sharing becomes really valuable because they just want to help each other.
Yeah, it's actually very similar to when they have an initiative in Canberra. They probably have it across Australia. When you have your first baby, you go along to this sort of training program once a week for a few weeks. It's for first time mums, and it's not so much the education as the community. And the group that I joined years ago, we went on and we created our own kind of mothers meeting, and we'd go together and we'd go out to dinner and leave the babies at home with dad. Just all of this stuff, being able to share with someone else who's on the same journey. And everyone has slightly different issues and challenges, but they can all bring ideas to the table and they can all share things that worked. And everyone it just makes it so much easier. It just does from an emotional perspective.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. In fact, my eldest is 29 and I still see the playgroup mums regularly from that group because we've been through so much together and
Yep.
supported each other so much. So
Yep.
yeah, very similar to that. So there's a real collegiality and a building up of resilience and networking with that group.
Yep. And no one gets it like another business owner. And another business owner in your space, that is just priceless. It really is.
It is.
Mm.
I think we probably covered everything about introducing laser in IPL, but I'd love to see what the listeners think.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, we always love feedback and we love to hear what your thoughts are, any aha moments that you've had, as well as just general feedback. And if you'd like to drop us a line, we'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. And we will, all of the references and resources that we alluded to today, we'll drop them in that spot so they're nice and accessible to you. But until we talk to you next time on Clinic Conversations, stay safe, be happy. And it was great to spend time with you today.
Thanks, Alyssa.
Okay, bye.